The day my daughter-in-law first laid eyes on me, she looked at my hands. Not my face, my hands. And I saw exactly what she thought. Calloused, cracked, permanently stained from 30 years of soil that no amount of washing quite gets out. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. It barely reached her cheeks. My name is Norman. I'm 63 years old. I run a cattle operation on 400 acres outside Muskogee, Oklahoma. I've been doing it since I was 22, when my father handed me the deed and told me the land would take everything I had. He wasn't wrong. It took my back, most of my knees, 2 trucks, 1 marriage, and more sleep than I'll ever get back. What it gave me in return, I couldn't put a dollar sign on. Not back then. Not until I had to. My son, my only boy. I'll call him my son. That's what he is to me, and that's enough. He left Muskogee at 18 to study finance at UT Austin. Full scholarship. I drove him there in my '09 F-250, helped him carry boxes up 3 flights of stairs, and shook his hand at the bottom of the steps before I drove the 6 hours home alone. I cried somewhere around Ardmore. I'm not ashamed of that. He did well. Better than well. Graduated top of his class, got recruited straight into a private equity firm in Dallas, and by the time he was 31, he was making more in a month than I used to clear in a good year. I was proud. I told everyone. My farmhands heard about it so many times I'm sure they could have recited his resume by heart. What I wasn't prepared for was her family. My son called me in February 2 years ago and told me he was engaged. Her name was Brittany. Her father was a commercial real estate developer out of Highland Park. That's the old money section of Dallas, for those who don't know. Her mother sat on the boards of 3 nonprofits and hadn't cooked a meal in 15 years. They had a vacation house in Vail and a standing reservation at a steakhouse where the cheapest cut ran $60. I told my son I was happy for him. And I was. I meant it. He said, "Dad, her family wants to do an engagement dinner. Formal thing. They're booking a private room at Monarch." I had to look it up. Monarch was a rooftop restaurant in downtown Dallas. Dress code, prix-fixe menu. The kind of place where the sommelier talks more than the waiter. I said I'd be there. I drove down in my truck. I didn't own a car, hadn't in years. No need for one out on the property. I wore the sport coat I'd bought for my son's college graduation, a navy one from Dillard's that still fit well enough, and a pair of dark slacks I'd ironed myself that morning. I polished my boots. I put on the watch my father left me, a pullover with a worn leather strap, and I thought I looked presentable. When the valet at Monarch reached for my keys, I saw him glance at the truck. Nothing dramatic, just a flicker. I handed him the keys and didn't say anything. Inside, I gave my son's name to the hostess, and she walked me through the dining room to a private area near the back. Glass walls, city lights spreading out below us, candles on a long rectangular table already half occupied. My son stood up the moment he saw me. He crossed the room and hugged me, a real hug, the kind that lasts a second longer than a polite one. Brittany was beside him. She was pretty in a careful way. Everything in its place, nothing left to chance. She gave me a smile and extended her hand and said it was so nice to finally meet me. Then her mother leaned over to her father and said something I was not supposed to hear. "God, he actually came in that truck." She said it behind her hand, the way people do when they want plausible deniability. But the room was quiet and I heard every word. I kept my face steady. I'd spent 30 years dealing with weather that didn't care what I wanted, livestock that did whatever they felt like, and equipment that broke at the worst possible moments. I knew how to keep my face steady. Brittany's father, I'll call him her father, I never did get comfortable using his first name, stood and shook my hand, firm grip, controlled. He was a tall man, silver-haired, wearing a suit that cost more than my first tractor. He had the easy confidence of someone who had never once worried about whether the rain would come. "Norman," he said, "we've heard a great deal about you. The farming operation." He said the farming operation the way you'd say that little hobby of yours. I thanked him and sat down. Dinner moved through its courses the way those dinners do. A lot of talk about the wedding venue. They were considering a ranch outside Fredericksburg, which made me wonder if it was chosen partly for the irony of setting a society wedding in a place that looked like where I lived. Wine came and went. I drank 1 glass and switched to water. I'm not much of a drinker at the best of times, and this was not the best of times. Somewhere between the second and third course, her father turned to me. "So, Norman," he said, "what exactly does a cattle operation of your size generate, annually?" My son's jaw tightened. I saw it. He knew his father-in-law well enough by then to know that question was not curiosity. I told him honestly. I quoted last year's net. It was a good year. Cattle prices had been strong, and I'd sold a parcel of the back acreage that I'd been planning to sell anyway. Brittany's mother made a small sound. Not a word, just a sound. Her father nodded the way you nod when someone confirms what you already suspected. "That's respectable," he said, and went back to his wine. That word, respectable, sitting there like a pat on the head. My son changed the subject. He was good at that. He'd learned it as a kid. All the times he'd tried to smooth things over between me and his mother before the divorce. He started talking about a project he was working on, some portfolio acquisition, and the table's attention shifted, and I sat there and ate my food and told myself it didn't matter. But it did matter, because when I excused myself to use the restroom, I passed close behind Brittany and her mother was whispering again. "He's sweet, but can you imagine him at the rehearsal dinner? At the wedding? In the photos?" Brittany said. "Mother, I'm just saying what everyone will be thinking." I kept walking, went to the restroom, ran cold water over my wrists, looked at myself in the mirror. The sport coat was fine. The watch was fine. My hands were what they were. I went back to the table and finished dinner. Driving home that night, 6 hours back up through the dark, I kept thinking about one thing. Not the things they'd said, what they didn't know. 3 years before that dinner, I had been approached by an energy company about the mineral rights on my land. Oklahoma sitting atop some productive geological formations, as it turns out. I'd hired an attorney, a good one, and we'd negotiated a lease that paid me a signing bonus you could buy a house with and quarterly royalties on top of that. A nice house, the kind Brittany's parents owned. I hadn't told my son the details. He was busy, and I didn't like to mix his life with mine in ways that felt like leverage. He knew things were going well, that was how I'd put it. He didn't know the particulars. Brittany's family didn't know any of it. They'd seen the truck and made their calculations. I let them. The next 8 months were the months I don't enjoy remembering. I drove down to Dallas 4 times for various wedding-related events. Each time I drove the truck. Each time I wore what I owned. Each time Mother found some way to make me feel like a smudge on a clean window. At the engagement party, a brunch at their house in Highland Park, a house with a gated driveway and a fountain that I personally found ridiculous. I arrived at the same time as several of Brittany's relatives. I heard one of her aunts say to another, "Oh, he must be one of the caterers." I said good morning and walked inside. At the venue tour in Fredericksburg, Brittany's mother spent 20 minutes explaining the dress code to me in careful detail, as though I might show up to my son's wedding in coveralls. "We want everything to be very polished," she said. "Very consistent." "I'll manage," I told her. She smiled in the way that meant she doubted it. My son never said anything. I think he knew. I think he was caught in the middle and didn't know how to get out without someone getting hurt. I understood that. I'd been caught in the middle of things myself. What I didn't understand was when he started changing. It was subtle at first. Little things. He stopped calling on Sunday mornings, which had been our standing call for years. When I reached him, the conversations were shorter, more distracted. He visited the ranch once that year, stayed one night instead of his usual 3, and seemed uncomfortable in the kitchen where we'd always talked the most easily. Like the familiar space had become unfamiliar to him. Then in October, about 6 weeks before the wedding, he called and asked me something that I still have trouble putting into plain language. He asked if I would mind sitting with my ranch foreman during the reception rather than at the main family table. I sat with the phone in my hand for a long moment. "The seating chart," he said. "It's complicated, and Brittany's family has a lot of. It's just easier if—" "Who's sitting at the family table?" I asked. He listed her parents, her grandparents, her aunts and uncles, a family friend who'd known them for 30 years. "And where does that put me?" I asked. "Table 7, he said, "near the back." I said I'd think about it and I'd call him back. I did not call him back that day. I went out to the south pasture and walked the fence line for 2 hours, which is what I do when I need to think without distraction. The cattle moved around me and the sun went down and I made a decision. I was not going to table 7, but I wasn't going to make a scene at my son's wedding either. That was his day. Whatever had gotten into him, whatever pressure he was under, I loved him, and I wasn't going to ruin the thing he'd been looking forward to. I called my attorney that night. Not about the wedding. About something I'd been considering since before any of this started. A restructuring of my business holdings. The energy royalties had accumulated into something substantial enough that it made sense to put them into a proper structure. A holding company, a few smart investments, an estate plan. We'd been talking about it for over a year. I told him I wanted to move faster. How fast? He said. Before the end of the month, I said. He whistled a little. But he made it happen. 2 weeks before the wedding, I drove down to Dallas one more time. My attorney had arranged a meeting with a wealth management firm he'd partnered with to go over the structure and sign off on the transfer documents. Straightforward enough, but they wanted me in person. I stayed overnight at a hotel downtown. Nothing extravagant, but not the kind of hotel where you worry about the sheets. I had dinner by myself at a normal restaurant and went to bed early. The next morning, I put on the sport coat again. Same one. Worn in now, comfortable. My father's watch, my good boots. I signed everything that needed signing and shook a lot of hands, and by noon I was done. A significant portion of my assets were now held in a properly structured LLC, with a separate trust set aside for estate purposes. My attorney walked me through the summary page. The number at the bottom, total held assets, made the meeting room feel a little smaller and quieter for a moment. I thanked everyone, shook more hands and drove home. I called my son that evening and told him I'd thought about the seating. I'll sit at table 7, I said, but I want you to do something for me in return. Anything, Dad, he said, and he sounded relieved. I want you to have dinner with me, just the 2 of us, the Friday before the wedding, wherever you want. My treat, he said yes immediately. We went to a steakhouse in Uptown, not Monarch. Somewhere quieter. We sat across from each other and ordered and talked for a while about nothing in particular, the way you do when you're warming up to something. He told me about work. I told him about a new bull I'd bought, how the herd was doing. Then I put down my fork and I said, I need you to be honest with me. He looked at me. Do you believe what they think about me? I said. That I'm something to be embarrassed by. He didn't answer right away. That was its own answer. It's not that, he said finally. It's just, their world is different, and I've spent a lot of time in it, and it's easier to. He stopped. Easier to keep me in the background, I said. He looked down at his plate. I know how it sounds. I'm not angry, I said, and I wasn't. Not anymore. The fence walking had taken care of the anger. But I want you to know something, and I want you to know it before you walk into this marriage. I reached into my jacket pocket and put the summary sheet from the wealth management meeting on the table. Just the cover page, with the total. He picked it up, he stared at it. He put it back down. Dad, he said. Quiet. I didn't tell you because I didn't want it to change anything, I said. And I didn't want you to feel like you owed me something, or like I was holding it over you. That's not what money is for. He was quiet for a while. The mineral rights, he said. Signed 3 years ago. The royalties have been very good. He sat back in his chair. He had the look of a man recalculating a long series of assumptions. Does Brittany know? He said. No, I said. And I'd like to keep it that way for now. I'm telling you because you're my son and you deserve to know. Not because I want it to change how anyone treats me. He nodded slowly. It shouldn't be about the money anyway, I said. I want you to understand that. How they've treated me, how you've let them treat me, that doesn't get better because the number on that page is big. It gets better because people decide to do better. He looked like he was about to cry, which surprised me. My son is not a man who cries easily. He gets that from me. I'm sorry, Dad, he said. I picked up my fork. I know you are. Now eat your steak. We got through the rest of dinner, and I paid the check, and we walked out together and stood on the sidewalk in the October air. He hugged me in the same way as that first night at Monarch, the kind that means something. "What are you going to do?" he said. "About the wedding." "I'm going to sit at table 7, I said, "and I'm going to behave myself, because it's your day and I love you." He nodded. "But things change after," I said. "I think you understand that." He did. The wedding was a Saturday in November out at the ranch venue in Fredericksburg, 60 degrees, which is perfect for that part of Texas in fall. The ceremony was held under an old live oak, and I'll admit it was beautiful. I stood in the second row on the groom's side, and I watched my son wait at the altar in his rented tux, shifting his weight from foot to foot the way he'd done before every little league game he'd ever played. He looked over at me once. I nodded. He stopped shifting. Brittany came down the aisle on her father's arm. She looked lovely. Whatever I thought of the family, I meant that. She was radiant in the way brides are, a once-in-a-lifetime kind of beautiful, and my son's face when he saw her was the face of a man with no doubts. I was glad for that. Whatever else happened, I was glad for that. The reception was fine. The food was good. The band played the kind of music that works at weddings. Nothing too anything. I sat at table 7, which turned out to be a pleasant enough table. 2 of Brittany's college friends and their husbands, a cousin who'd driven up from San Antonio, a colleague of my son's from work whom I'd met once before and liked. We talked, we ate, we drank moderately. Brittany's mother came by the table once. I think it was a deliberate gesture, a proof of magnanimity. She stood behind my chair for a moment and touched my shoulder. "Norman," she said, "we're so glad you could be here." "Thank you," I said. "It's a beautiful event. You did wonderful work." She smiled, a real one this time. I think she appreciated being thanked. It cost me nothing to say it. It wasn't surrender. It was just accuracy. I left at 9 before the last round of dancing. I hugged my son and shook his hand, and he held on a beat longer than he needed to. "Call me when you're back from the honeymoon," I said. "I will," he said. I drove home in the dark, different from the drive home after that first dinner. Not heavier, actually lighter, the way it feels when you've said what needed saying and now you can set it down. About 3 weeks after the honeymoon, Brittany's father called me. He called my cell directly. I was out checking on a fence section when it rang and I almost didn't answer. The number wasn't in my contacts. But I did. "Norman," he said, "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not a problem," I said. "What can I do for you?" There was a short pause, the kind where someone is deciding how to arrange themselves. "I've been speaking with my financial advisor. We're looking at a commercial land opportunity in eastern Oklahoma, and I was told you might have some familiarity with that market." I waited. "I wonder if we might have lunch," he said. "I'd like to pick your brain." I understood what had happened. He'd found out. I didn't know how. Perhaps my son had said something. Perhaps his people had dug around. It didn't matter. "Sure," I said. "I'll be in Tulsa week after next. We can meet there." We did. I drove up, parked the truck in front of a restaurant he'd chosen downtown. He was already there when I arrived. Dressed down for him, no tie, just a blazer. He stood up and shook my hand and seemed, for the first time, slightly uncertain how to place himself. We ordered. He talked about the land deal. It was a reasonable enough opportunity, a parcel near Wagoner he was looking at for mixed-use development. He wanted my read on local agricultural land values, mineral rights issues, whether the area had any quirks he should know about. I told him what I knew, honestly. Some of it was useful to him. Some of it he'd already researched, and I confirmed his findings. It was a normal business conversation, professional, mutual. At the end of it, over coffee, he leaned back and looked at me for a moment in a way that was different from how he'd looked at me before. "My daughter told me something," he said. "After the wedding, I didn't help him along. She said my wife made a comment," he said, "at the engagement dinner. About your truck. She said you heard it." "I heard it," I said. He had the decency to look uncomfortable. I should have said something at the time. "Yes," I said. "You should have. Not cruel, just accurate." He nodded once, accepting that. "You didn't say anything to my son," he said. "He had enough going on," I said. Another silence. Outside the window, Tulsa moved around us in the ordinary way of a weekday noon. "You're not what I expected," he said finally. "I know," I said. "What I didn't say was that's the whole problem, isn't it? You decided what I was before you shook my hand, before you knew my name, and everything that came after was just you filling in the sketch you'd already drawn." I didn't say it. He knew it. That was enough. We split the check. His suggestion, which I thought was a decent gesture. We shook hands in the parking lot, and he said he'd be in touch about the Wagoner parcel, and I said, "Fine." I watched him drive away in a car that cost about what I spend on feed in 2 years, and I didn't feel anything as strong as satisfaction. I felt something quieter. The feeling you get when the weather breaks after a long bad stretch, and everything is still wet and torn up, but the sky is clear and you know the hard part is behind you. My son and I are close again. He calls on Sunday mornings. He came out to the ranch in June with Brittany, and she stood in my kitchen, and I showed her how to make the cornbread my mother used to make, which she seemed to genuinely want to learn. She asked good questions. Maybe that's who she is when she's not performing who her family expects her to be. Maybe she's still figuring that out. She's young. Her mother sent me a Christmas card, signed by both of them. She wrote inside, in her neat handwriting, "So wonderful to have you as part of the family." I put it on the refrigerator with a magnet. I don't need her to grovel. I don't need her father to humble himself. I'm 63 years old, and I've learned that most people are doing their best within whatever small frame they've built for the world. And when you show them the frame is small, some of them expand it. That's all you can ask. What I'll tell you, and this is the thing I think about most when I go over all of it, it was never about the money. I know that sounds like something people say, but I mean it in a specific way. If I'd walked into that engagement dinner with empty pockets, and the same truck, and the same worn-in sport coat, and the same pullover on my wrist, everything they did would still have been wrong. The money didn't make me worth treating with respect. I was always worth treating with respect. The money just made it, so they couldn't keep ignoring that. There's a difference between those two things. My father understood it. He used to say, "The land doesn't care who your grandfather was," meaning, what you build on your own terms, and the dirt under your feet measures you in work and time and honesty, not in how you look standing on it. I try to remember that on the hard days. I'm out here most mornings before the sun comes up fully, walking the fence line, checking on the herd, doing the 10,000 small things that keep 400 acres running and alive. My son called last Sundays and said Brittany is pregnant. Due in May. First grandchild. I stood in the south pasture when he told me, with the phone in my hand and the sun just clearing the ridge, and I thought about my father handing me the deed on a Tuesday morning in March, and what he said, and the long way around I've taken to understanding what he meant. This land will take everything you have. It will. And it gives back more than you expect, in ways you don't expect, at times you're not looking for it. I'm going to teach that child how to read weather and fix fence, and what the cattle are telling you when they bunch up near the gate. The same things my father taught me. The same things that didn't look like much from a rooftop restaurant in downtown Dallas, but turned out to be the foundation everything else was built on. Come May, I'll be ready.